My dear confreres, my dear formandi, our Redemptorist novices and students at different stages of formation, my dear Redemptoristine sisters, my dear sisters associated with our Redemptorist charism and mission, my dear Redemptorist lay missionaries, associates, collaborators, benefactors, oblates, and you, my dear brothers and sisters. You're very welcome to the second day of our Triduum in preparation for the feast of St. Clement Maria Hofbauer. We reflected yesterday on St. Clement in the context of this holy and jubilee year as a pilgrim of hope, someone who was extremely hope-filled and journeyed through life with this virtue of hope. Today we will reflect on St. Clement as a Redemptorist missionary of hope. How hope fueled his life as a missionary, making him a courageous missionary of hope in the footsteps of the Redeemer. We begin with Clement leaving Italy, commissioned and sent by the Superior General at the time, Francesco de Paula, who sent the two young men, Clement and Thaddeus, to Vienna in Austria to launch the congregation outside Italy. Having come to Vienna, they could do very little because the law imposed by the Emperor Joseph II from the Habsburg dynasty was very clear. No new religious congregation could be founded in the empire, the Austrian Empire. So both Clement and Thaddeus waited, hoping that there would be some change, hoping. In the meantime, they did a couple of courses on catechesis, on pastoral theology, as the months ticked by. They were soon joined by another young man named Immanuel Kunzmann, who, having listened to what it means to be a Redemptorist, chose to be a brother. And so from two, they became three. All through 1786, they waited with very little hope of starting in Austria. Then a window of opportunity opened. They began to be hopeful. There was an invitation for them to go to neighboring Poland, to Warsaw. They grabbed the opportunity, got the necessary permissions, and they set out for Warsaw in Poland. They reached Warsaw towards the end of the winter. It was 1787. And with the necessary permissions from the nuncio and the local archbishop and the superior general back in Rome, they were given a small little church, a German-speaking church that would care for German-speaking people in the city of Warsaw. It was called St. Benno's. The three of them began in simple, humble surroundings. There was very little for them. A broken down residence, a small church, just a few people. In the very first few months, there were just about 2,000 people who came for worship, German-speaking people. 2,000 in about 6 months' time. But the three began. The immediate decision was to start something different. Why different? Redemptorists were known for preaching popular missions from parish to parish. But that was forbidden them. They couldn't do it. They had to be full-time caring for German-speaking Catholic people here in St. Benno's in Warsaw. So Clement decided to transform the situation and to launch what he called a perpetual mission. that St. Benno's would be on perpetual mission. They would be offering Mass through the day. They would be offering mission preaching through the day. They would be offering services, not just in German, but soon in different languages, as they began to invite people who spoke Czech, Hungarian, naturally Polish, even Russian, to come to understand, to grow and learn the faith. At a time when people were struggling on the one hand with the harshness and bitterness, the cruelty and the frigidity, including rigidity, of Jansenism. And on the other hand, the strong influence of rationalism that laughed at and looked down on the Catholic faith. It's in this context that Clement decided that the role of the Redemptorists was to nurture faith, to help people grow to appreciate the love of the Lord in their lives and to respond with love. As a means to attract people, Clement's love for music brought him to bring an orchestra into the church of St. Benno's. An orchestra that played from the spiritual music and the religious compositions of Beethoven, of Mozart, of Handel. This drew people to come to pray and to worship. As Clement would say, music raises the hearts and the minds to God. Clement transformed St. Benno's into a perpetual mission. There were processions to celebrate Corpus Christi with the Blessed Sacrament. There was perpetual adoration daily. There were processions to honor our Blessed Mother, as the statue of our Blessed Mother was carried in procession, with the colors and standards and the flags of nations bowing to our Blessed Mother, or to the Blessed Sacrament if it was a procession with the Most Holy Eucharist. Clement himself preached in a variety of languages. He could preach in Czech, his father was Czech. He could preach in German, his mother was German. Because of Czech, he could speak Polish and Hungarian. St. Benno's was transformed into a hub of activity, missionary activity. So much so, in 6 years' time, from 2,000 in 6 months, there were 100,000 people in 6 months who came to celebrate, worship, and pray at St. Benno's. Clement also saw the need for a missionary outreach in the context of war. Warsaw was plagued with bitter battles. Not far from St. Benno's, across the river Wisła, was the battlefield. And Clement and the Redemptorists witnessed, literally, the brutality of war. War ends up with pain, tragedy, suffering, and death. And so there were many orphans, boys and girls. Clement's immediate response was to start an orphanage. He called it the Infant Jesus Refuge Center. For orphans, children lost their parents, either parents or both, through the war. In order to run the orphanage, he invited lay people and empowered these lay people to look after the orphanage. He himself would raise funds for the upkeep of the orphanage and the care of the children. He soon saw the need for education of these children, not just the orphans, but all boys and girls. And so he started a school on the one hand, and on the other hand, he started a vocational training school, especially for boys and girls who were not able to go to school, but they would have a trade. Keeping in mind the work of Sarnelli in Naples, who helped young girls be freed from prostitution or from the danger of falling into prostitution through education. How did Clement run these? He guided the lay people. He formed a circle, a group of lay people who would come together, pray together, share and discuss good religious material together, and then offer their services to care for the orphanage, to teach in the schools, and to look after the vocational training center. Clement eventually, in 1804, got permission from the Holy Father, Pope Pius VII, to declare these group of lay people as oblates of the congregation. Further, Clement and the Redemptorists, with their amazing work, began to attract young men. At the beginning, they were three: Clement, Thaddeus, and Emmanuel Kunzman, two priests and a brother. By 1805-6, they were as many as 17 priests, 10 young seminarians, and 9 brothers. God had blessed this young missionary spirit and endeavor of the congregation through the efforts of Clement, the missionary of hope. But then tragedy struck, as it always does when there is success. It was the year 1805-6. Napoleon and his troops invaded Poland and took over the city of Warsaw. The Redemptorists, because of the strong French anti-Catholic sentiment, the Redemptorists were expelled and St. Beno's was closed. The thriving work of the missionary efforts of Clement seemed to end. The Redemptorists were scattered to houses that Clement founded in Bavaria, southern Germany, and a couple in Switzerland. Clement himself left Warsaw never to return, but he went instead to his own homeland, to Austria, to Vienna. Which now brings me to his time in Vienna and the amazing missionary of hope that he was in the footsteps of the Redeemer in the city of Vienna. Entering Vienna around 1807, Clement could not acknowledge that he was a Redemptorist. To do so would mean expulsion. And so he chose just to work quietly as a confessor, hearing confessions day in and day out, from morning to night, in 2 churches, the Church of the Franciscans and the Church of the Capuchins, as well as helping the Melkite monks with confessions. For the next 2 years, all Clement did was hear confessions. Gradually, he began to make friends with people. And in making friends with people, he began to become a spiritual director. He began to visit the sick. It was only in 1813, because of his friendships, because of the kind of confessor that he was, because of his amazing gift and ability to direct people in the spiritual life, people contacted the Archbishop and Nuncio, who finally sought permission from the king, and Clement was given charge of a chapel in the University of Vienna. It was called the Chapel of St. Ursula. Given this chapel, Clement was joyful the year 1813, and he began to replicate exactly what he did in Warsaw, as he now drew the students from the university, the professors, to come to pray, to come to worship, to come to celebrate. Again, the liturgy was a means to attract the young people. He began to get an orchestra going in the church that played from the religious music of Beethoven, Mozart, and Haydn. He himself began to preach initially, but soon he was forbidden to preach because he didn't have permission to preach. Clement responded, "That's all right. I won't preach, but the gospel will be preached in different ways." And so he did. What were the ways in which he now chose to proclaim the gospel if he was not allowed to preach? Well, the first was to gather the young people. A couple of times a week in the evening after class, in his own humble abode, he gathered them together. Being a baker, he baked biscuits and cookies. He baked cake and tarts for them as they sat to share, to discuss, to study, but above all, to understand the faith. This was a great time for these young people who were cared for by Clement and who had the opportunity to share, discuss, and talk openly about the faith. He did the same as he brought together professors from the university to share good reading, to talk about issues concerning the faith in the light of, on the one hand, Jansenism and its rigidity, and on the other hand, the Enlightenment and its rebuking of the Catholic faith. He decided to start a magazine. It was called the Olive Branch. The young people and the professors began to write and contribute to this monthly journal, the Olive Branch, as the faith began to be disseminated through writing. Further, Clement began to continue visiting the sick, the aged, the troubled. He kept on with hearing confessions and spiritual direction, which brought him into contact with different Protestants. He never rebuked them. He never denounced them. He never asked them to be Catholic. He just offered friendship. And the amazing result was most of these Protestants eventually, through friendship, sought to become Catholic. This was a remarkable time. This missionary, courageous as he was a missionary of hope, following the footsteps of the Redeemer. However, tragedy always strikes, does it not? And it did. In 1718, Clement was exposed. Even though he kept quiet at being a Redemptorist, but kept on writing to the Superior General through secret letters, he was exposed for being a Redemptorist. He was imprisoned and given a choice. You either disown your congregation, then you would be allowed to continue being in Vienna, or if you do not disown your congregation, you're expelled. Clement said, I'd rather be expelled from my fatherland than disown my congregation. The emperor at the time was Franz, and he was on a visit himself, his pilgrimage to Rome. He met with Pope Pius VII, and the Pope, having heard of the work of Clement, spoke to the emperor about the pearl, the jewel of Vienna, referring to Clement. The emperor was embarrassed and promised the Holy Father that he would make sure that Clement was freed. When the emperor came back in 1719 to Vienna, he called for Clement and asked Clement, what did Clement want? Clement immediately asked, approve the Redemptorist congregation in the empire, in Vienna. The emperor granted it verbally and asked for the rules of the congregation. Unfortunately, Clement, sitting to write the rules, died on the 15th of March, 1820. Like Moses, he never actually had the opportunity of entering the promised land of the congregation established in Vienna. But his hope did not disappoint. His hope was fulfilled. The emperor had given his word, and the emperor kept that word and gave the most beautiful Marian shrine in the city of Vienna, Maria am Gestade, to the Redemptorists as the first foundation officially approved in the Austrian Empire of the Redemptorist congregation. A church and a house that we have as Redemptorists till this day, where the remains of St. Clement are kept for veneration. Clement was beatified in 1788 and was canonized saint in 1910, and in 1914 was declared the second patron of the city of Vienna. Hope does not disappoint. We learn this from the great missionary courage demonstrated by St. Clement. That even though there are obstacles, challenges, troubles, difficulties in the life of a missionary, in proclaiming the gospel, if one is hopeful, one will find new ways to proclaim the gospel. Clement's example is a challenge to all of us, whoever we are today. Redemptorist missionaries, Redemptorist laity, Redemptorist sisters, religious sisters following the same missionary impulse and charism of our congregation, and you, my dear sisters and brothers, all of us. Hope does not disappoint. As Pope Francis says, we're all called to be signs of hope to our sisters and brothers in trouble today. Clement showed us the way. You and I can do the same as missionaries of hope in the footsteps of the Redeemer.